Hey, my name is Daniel and welcome back to another Elder Scrolls Betrayal of the Second Era video, and today we're exploring the Pilgrim class, understanding its diplomatic skills and precise abilities. As always in my class guide videos, I'll be covering everything you need to know about this class, how their abilities work, how and when to upgrade to the master side, which races pair well with them, what starting skill line to choose, what additional skill lines offer good synergy, and what items can enhance the build. And finally, I'll show a bit of gameplay so you could get a sense of how the class actually plays and feels at the table. I'll put timestamps in the description if you want to jump ahead, although I would really appreciate if you stick around for the whole thing. Now, a quick disclaimer: I think figuring things out for yourself is one of the most rewarding parts in this game, and I would encourage everyone to experiment and find their own playstyle. That said, the game can feel a bit overwhelming at first, so this guide is here to help you get started and understand how the class works. And if you're already a seasoned player, I hope you can still find something interesting here too. And now let's get into the guide. So as always, let's start with the innate ability, which says that all trainers in town populate one additional skill line. So as you know, all trainers in town have a different amount of skill lines available for you to train. For example, here we have 5 skill lines available in this town, and we have 3 skill lines available in this town. But if you are playing Pilgrim, or if you have a Pilgrim in your party played by another adventurer, you increase this number by 1, so in this case you would populate 6 skill lines, and in this case you would populate with 4 skill lines. And personally, I think this innate ability is great. It obviously doesn't deal any damage on its own, but the utility it provides is just really good. Because sometimes finding the right skill line that you want for your build can be quite problematic, especially in certain towns or certain provinces. Some of those trainer options might be more limited, so just having one extra option I think is great. It's very useful whether you're playing solo or in group with some other adventurers, and I think it works specifically great for Pilgrim because of some certain class ability that we're gonna see later here. And speaking of class abilities, the first one we have is called Gilded Fingers. For 1 tenacity, you discard 1 common item and then you draw 1 common item. So essentially just exchanging items. You discarded something from your pack and then drawing a new card from the deck. So if you're looking for some specific items, these can be pretty good. And even though just a single tenacity, personally I think there are just better ways of spending tenacity, so personally again I just quite rarely using this ability, but that being said, I still imagine it quite useful, especially if you're going for some specific item, or maybe even if you're trying to build a whole build around a specific item. The next class ability is called Exploiter. For 1 tenacity, you drain an available skill die, then heal yourself for a health equal to this die level plus 1. So remember that available skill dice means sitting in your attribute rows in your adventure mat ready for rolling, so it means it's not in the active slot and not in the cooldown track. And so with this ability you can spend 1 tenacity to drain this die, which means you're gonna set this aside for the rest of the combat until the end of battle cleanup, and you won't be able to use this die. But then you heal yourself for health equal to the die level plus 1, so for example, because this one is a level 1, then you would heal for 2 health. And personally I think this ability is great. I think just having some healing options built in the class ability is very helpful, especially when you're playing through solo. I also quite like the flexibility that you can drain die of any level, and depending on the amount of heal you need. Maybe sometimes draining a level 1 skill die is all you need, but when you need more heal, if you want to, you can potentially drain even a level 4 skill die to heal for 5 health again when you need it. I think for 1 tenacity is a very fair trade. Moving on to the next class ability called Diplomat. For 2 tenacity interrupt during a town encounter, if the current town has an inn, 1 adventurer may take an inn action for free. Now generally speaking, I'm trying to avoid taking an inn action in towns in general, because if you're spending a town action on the inn, means you're not gaining any items from the market, or you're not gaining any skill lines from the trainers, or you're potentially not gaining side quests or things like that. But that being said, I think this still can be quite useful, especially when in certain provinces the number of town encounters or the town actions you can take is limited and you desperately need a town and inn action. This can definitely come in handy. Moving on to the next class ability, we have Wayfarer. For 3 tenacity, randomly draw any 1 unused class sheet. You may then trigger any of its non-enduring, non-interrupt abilities. Alternatively, heal for 1 health and deal 1 true damage to an adjacent enemy. So unused class sheets are basically all class sheets that are currently not playing and not presently in the game, so you just randomly selecting any of those sheets and you can trigger any of their ability, of course non-enduring and non-interrupt, from either Novice or the master sides. Now the caveat though, that there are a couple of specific abilities that you cannot use unless you plan that specific class. For example, on the Necromancer, as you probably know, besides spending tenacity you need to spend another resource called this Necrosis stack. I have a Necromancer class guide on my channel, so if you're curious, watch that video, but the point is that you cannot use this ability without those Necrosis stack, and obviously as a non-Necromancer, you essentially just cannot trigger any of its abilities. The same is true for the Arcanist class. They have their own special resource called Crux tokens, and again, you cannot use the class abilities without them. So if you spend in your 3 tenacity to use this Wayfarer and you randomly draw one of those cards, that is quite a bummer. The only thing you can do is just heal for 1 health and deal 1 true damage to an adjacent enemy, which definitely isn't as good, and frankly some of the best probable abilities that I'm always happy to use and always happy to see if I manage to draw those class sheets are probably Templar's Luminous Shard. That is just a huge area damage, or maybe something from the Sorcerer like Blood Magic or Dark Exchange. So yeah, overall there are just a plenty of good useful class abilities, just be mindful that a couple of them you essentially cannot use at all. And finally, moving on to the last class ability, we have Precision. For 4 tenacity, deal a targetable enemy 2 true damage for each level 4 skill die you have trained. And this is exactly what makes this class so strong. Because this ability deals true damage, and because it's scalable, I think this might be the most hard-hitting at least single target ability in the game. It's just a ridiculous amount of damage. Of course, you need to have a bunch of level 4 skill dice for that in order to get the most value out of this ability, but we're gonna talk about this in this video just a little bit later on. And also keep in mind that because you can deal damage to a targetable enemy, and whether the enemy is targetable or not depending on your battle form. So let's say if I am in the heavy weapon battle form, I can target only adjacent enemies, which means this Breton Bandit would not be a targetable enemy. However, I can choose my battle form to, let's say, to range, and because I have 3 stamina, that means I can target enemies within range 3, and so in this case Breton Bandit would be a targetable enemy, and so I can use my precision to potentially even to enemies in range. This is just something to keep in mind because this ability doesn't require any particular battle form, so you have full flexibility on who would you consider a targetable enemy depending on your battle form. Now let's talk about how to become a Master Pilgrim, and it says that you need to have all 8 attribute slots on your adventure mat filled with stats and skill lines. So attribute rows are these circular round slots on both sides of your adventure mat, and you simply need to fill them up with stats or skill lines. And since each adventurer starts with 3 stats, health, stamina and magicka, and 2 skill lines, 1 combat and 1 another stat and skill line, that means you need to fill up with only 3 remaining skill lines essentially. And of course you can train any skill lines you want, have a complete freedom in that sense, so it could be this one or that one or this one, completely any skill lines you want, and you don't even need to train any dice as long as you have all the circular and round slots filled in with stat tokens or skill line tokens in this case, then well done, you became a Master Pilgrim. And because of the innate ability that all trainers in town populate with 1 additional skill line, I think this is generally pretty easy to fulfill. You can even potentially become a Master Pilgrim right away on day 2 if you want to, of course provided that you're not taking any other town actions, but the main question is it even worth it to kind of rush in and do this as quick as you can? And well, to be honest, unlike most other classes where I generally say that you need to promote to the master side as quick as you can, for Pilgrim specifically I would say there is no rush. I would rather suggest focusing on the skill lines that you actually want to train and not just the random skill lines that you see first on a day first of your town encounter. I would say there are of course a couple of nice upgrades on the master side, which we're of course gonna talk about in a moment, but our main source of damage and kind of the most fun part of this class of Pilgrim is the precision ability. It stays the same, and so for this reason I would probably say that just take your time, make sure you find the skill lines you want. I think even Novice Pilgrim is still very strong. So now let's see what changed on the master side, starting with the innate ability, which says you gain 2 tenacity whenever you train a non-combat skill die. And so remember that combat skill dice are only these white dice that each adventurer starts with, so you gain only tenacity when you train any non-combat skill die. For example, from this 2-handed skill line, if we train this level 2 skill die called Onslaught, it is not a combat skill die, so therefore if we train this one we would gain 2 tenacity as well. And even though it may seem like this ability doesn't do a lot, I think it's actually quite strong as well, simply because having 2 tenacity is kinda already halfway through towards using our precision ability, and potentially can be even already enough if we have certain skill dice that can make our class abilities cost fewer tenacity. And so the more tenacity you have, the more freely you can use your class abilities, and especially precision in particular, and for this reason I quite like this ability. And I would even add that for the same reason I would suggest taking a lot of unstable encounters if you can, because remember that at the end of an unstable encounter, even if it was a peaceful encounter, you gain in 2 tenacity as well, which as already said helps a lot to triggering our precision ability more often. Moving on to the class abilities, we have the upgraded version of Gilded Fingers. For 1 tenacity we can now discard either a common or a legendary item and then draw a common item. And believe it or not, I think that some common items are actually great and could be sometimes even better than legendary items in certain circumstances, so I think it actually makes sense to sometimes discard a legendary item to draw a common item. But that being said, and as I already mentioned, I think there are still better ways of spending tenacity, so personally I find myself using this ability quite rarely, even the upgraded version. Moving on, next we have Exploiter, which stays exactly the same healing ability, which I like a lot, not only because generally speaking heal is good, but also because it's flexible and it costs only 1 tenacity. I think it's just great. Next we have the upgraded version of Diplomat, which now for 2 tenacity and interrupt during a town encounter, 1 adventurer may take an additional available town action for free. So previously it was only in action, and now we can take any available town action. And I think this is now certainly much better, because this means you can potentially gain 3 items from a shop in a single town encounter, or maybe gain 2 items and still gain some side quests. Just more options, more flexibility, and even though I still find myself using this pretty rarely, I think it's still quite a nice upgrade overall. Next, Wayfarer stays exactly the same. This ability still can be hit or miss depending on the luck of your draw. I guess it can be pretty fun sometimes, just you never know what ability you can trigger, and it can be pretty powerful, but definitely not the most reliable ability, that's for sure. Moving on, next we have a new ability that was not available on the Novice side at all. That is Keen Eye. For 3 tenacity enduring, after you defeat an enemy that has enemy skills Steal or Shatter, you draw 1 legendary item. And oh boys, it feels so nice to finally stealing enemies from all those nasty steal enemies. It's like whenever I trigger this ability, it feels kinda like revenge for all those items that all those bandits have been stealing me for all of my campaigns. And I think what makes this ability so easy to use is that because it's enduring, which means you don't even need to spend tenacity. As long as you have 3 or more tenacity, this ability is always active, and so this is why I'm so happy to see all those steal enemies, because that's potentially more free legendary items. And to be fair, there is a couple of legendary items that work great with this build, so not only this ability is pretty nice and satisfying, but it's actually quite useful as well. And finally we have Precision, which stays exactly the same, which I guess is fair enough since it's already one of the strongest ability in the game. So no complaints about that. Now let's select a race for our Pilgrim, and the first race I would suggest considering is Imperial. And because Pilgrim is such a tenacity hungry class, you always want to use your Precision ability ideally every single turn, and because Imperial gives that tenacity, I think it's a natural synergy. And not only that, but Imperial's metal ability also prevents some damage, which also helps us a lot as well, since Pilgrim doesn't have any way of preventing damage. And of course this ability not gonna save you against some potentially high burst damage, because it can prevent only up to 3 damage, but nevertheless I think even that, and of course because of the gain in tenacity, I think it's just a lot of natural synergy going on there. And personally, whenever I play Pilgrim, Imperial is my favorite choice. Another option to consider is Redguard, because we're likely gonna use a bunch of different skill lines. That means we're gonna take quite a lot of engages, and then for our cooldown track would likely be very busy with fatigue. This Adrenaline Rush ability certainly helps with that a bit, because not only it clears your cooldown track from all this fatigue, including over fatigue, it also can remove status die and give you some bonus health, which can essentially act as shield. So yeah, that's just another defensive option and kind of more utility option that can work with Pilgrim quite nice as well. That being said, I think these stats are probably not the best, because ideally we want to have 5 health, and to be honest we probably don't need that much combat, but the racial ability definitely can compensate that. Now if you want a slight change of pace, and instead of going defensive you want to go full on the offense, consider Orc. Not only their stats are probably the best as you can have, 3 cooldown and 5 health, that is perfect, but of course most importantly their racial ability once per battle at the end of turn can gain 1 over fatigue to take an immediate extra turn. So yeah, just more turns, more actions, more engages, more defeated enemies, which can potentially lead to taking less damage as well, though of course that is not always possible. So if you like having some power turns, Orc is definitely the way to go, but keep in mind that you will be extremely squishy without any defensive options. And probably on the opposite spectrum of Orc we have Argonian, and with their Argonian resistance ability once per battle, when you would be dealt damage, you can prevent all of that damage. It was pretty similar to Imperial in a way that is another way of preventing damage, although of course you're not gonna gain any tenacity. Those stats wise, I think this is actually perfect as well. 5 health, 3 stamina is what we need, and even though I personally consider this racial ability not as strong as Imperial, especially for Pilgrim in particular, I think for this guide I'm gonna stick with Argonian, because you know what, I think out of all of my class guides, I haven't picked Argonian even a single time, so you know what, just for the sake of diversity, let's go with Argonian this time. Alright, we've got our race, we've got our class, time to build our character. And this one might be a little bit unusual one because I think in case of Pilgrim, the main question you want to ask yourself is how many level 4 skill dice you want to train in order to get the maximum value out of precision ability. And in order to find out whether it's worth training additional level 4 skill dice, let's have a look at something different. So what we're looking at right now is my database in Notion, where I've manually added every single non-quest enemy in the game. As you can see, we have all their stats and provinces and levels and all those things, and the most important part here at the bottom you see the count. It's 116 enemies. That is how much in total enemies and non-quest enemies specifically are presently in the game with the base game and the Valiant Wood expansion. Now remember that our precision ability deals 2 true damage for each level 4 skill die we have trained. So you know what, let's filter this database by health, and let's start with by seeing how many enemies have fewer or equal to 2 health. And the number is just 2, as you can see, just a simple skeleton and imp. If you train only one single level 4 skill die, that is how many enemies you can essentially one-shot with this ability. Not much, obviously. Now if we change this number from 2 up to 4, as you can see at the bottom we have count 26, so that is quite a lot of level 1 enemies, some level 5 enemies, and for these 10 and level 20 enemies, actually don't pay attention to them because they are colossal, which means they're gonna deploy with additional health, so these are rather exceptions. So 4 is still decent but not much. Now let's change this to 6. It's as if you're training 3 level 4 skill die, and now we have 85 enemies, so definitely quite a big jump now from 4 to 6, because that now includes probably every single level 1 enemy, and now I presume the majority of level 5 enemies as well, probably all of them actually, with maybe just a single or just a couple of exceptions. And that is even enough to deal quite a lot of damage and defeat quite a lot of level 10 enemies as well, and even a couple of level 20 enemies. But we can go even further with this, and let's say if you train 4 skill dice, that means your precision would deal 8 damage, and that is 110 enemies. So now if we scroll back, that is definitely all level 5 enemies, and probably all level 10 enemies as well, and even quite a few of level 20 enemies as well. So basically we have just 6 enemies left that you cannot one-shot with those precision ability, dealing 8 damage by having 4 level 4 skill dice trained. Now the question is it even worth training a 5th skill die? And to find out, let's actually switch now this filter from equal or fewer to more than 8, and let's see what enemies left. And as I said, there are just 6 enemies because there are 116 in total, but the thing is that the most of those level 20 enemies, they are from the general pool, as you can see by this province GE. So all of those giant and titan and bal mammoth and goblin butcher and remora, you're gonna see them quite often. And that means that if you train only 4 level 4 skill dice and your precision would deal 8 damage, that won't be enough to defeat those enemies, which might be quite troublesome in some situations. So personally, whenever I play Pilgrim, I prefer to train 5 skill dice of level 4 just to be sure that my precision ability can one-shot pretty much all the enemies in the game, with the only single exception, and that is a single enemy with more than 10 health, and that is Bal Mammoth, but frankly this enemy is probably not the most threatening compared to some other level 20 enemies, so I'm fine with just having a single enemy not included in my kind of one-shot list. So now going back to our character advancements, now you know that it's worth training all 5 or all the way up to 5 of level 4 skill dice in order to get the maximum value out of your precision. So with that in mind, I'm gonna slot in health on the top left corner, just like that, and quite unusually I'm gonna slot stamina across health, which obviously would limit the number of health I can train quite a lot, but this is one of the reasons why I chose to keep Argonian, or why I prefer to keep or playing as Imperial, because their racial ability can slightly mitigate and can offset a lower health. Now for the magicka, I'm gonna slot this over here on a new row, for no particular reason, just the only option since we already have both stats already sitting across, so that just goes like that. And for the combat, I'm gonna slot this on a new row just because I have another idea of what I might slot across. So for the starting skill line of Pilgrim, there are plenty of different choices. You can go full on the magic build, full on the melee build with different variations, and personally I prefer having two-handed as my starting skill line, because this is one of the very few skill lines in the game that has 2 of different level 4 skill dice, which is exactly what I want. So I'm slotting 2 first Wrecking Blow dice like that. Now for another skill line, some additional skill lines that are worth training, I think Acrobatics go just exceptionally well with this class, particularly because of the level 4 skill dice called Defiance. It will help us a lot to gain a lot of tenacity and some extra rerolls, some extra sustainability stability and kind of consistency, so I like this a lot. But that being said, I think it can be replaced with heavy armor if you want to. The level 4 die of the heavy armor skill line Juggernaut is great as well. So overall I would say just a matter of preference. I personally prefer Defiance and this acrobatic skill line, particularly because we're playing as a thief constellation. I think it's kind of more thematic to play as this kind of nimble warrior and being the acrobat rather than wearing a heavy armor. For another skill line that I want to train all the way up to level 4 is light armor, and I think this is one of the best skill lines in the game really. Now do keep in mind that this skill line requires the Valiant Wood expansion, so if you don't have access to this skill line, I guess you can somewhat replace this with Restoring Light. I think it's not as good, but still might come in handy. But if you do have access to this skill line, definitely the best choice I think. And lastly, for the last skill line to set across stamina, personally I like having this Legerdemain skill line. And this is of course another skill line from the Valiant Wood expansion, so if you don't have it, I guess you can try to somewhat replace it with Shadow, but I personally much prefer Legerdemain. I think it's more useful early in the game and can be quite helpful in the late game as well, and it's just another way of gaining more tenacity, which is very valuable for our class. Alright, so now with all skill lines set, now let's see what skill dice we want to train from and what we do actually want from those skill lines. And I think starting with two-handed skill line, the very first thing I would do is actually untrain another copy of Wrecking Blow, simply because we're gonna need to do this later anyway, but this way your next advancement will be cheaper, and this class does require quite a lot of experience. After that I would slot Onslaught. It is quite a lot of damage for a single die, and for this reason I quite like it. Now for the level 3 I would train Momentum, because we're gonna have quite a lot of different skill lines, we're gonna take quite a lot of engages. Our light fatigue won't be in shortage for sure, we're gonna have plenty of light fatigue, and that means we can deal a lot of burst damage with Momentum. And of course it's pretty tricky to roll this sometimes because it has 50% chance of misses, or rather 30%, but yeah, sometimes it's pretty tricky to roll this one, but we have something that might help with that. Now for the level 4 we definitely need Cleave, and even though it won't deal as crazy damage as in some other builds, it's still a source of pretty reliable and hard hitting damage. Even if you deal all of the damage just as a single target, it's still pretty nice, so yeah, I quite like it. And for the last slot of this skill line we have Balanced Blade, although ironically we won't be able to use this die at all. And so if you're guessing, yep, you're right, this is completely dead die. We don't even need to roll this at all, it's here purely to buff up our precision. Now if you don't like the idea of having a completely useless die, completely dead die that you can't even roll or use, you can potentially replace this with Executioner level 3 skill die, but because we're gonna have a pretty low health, I don't think Executioner is worth it, and I would personally rather deal more damage with precision, so I could one-shot all those scariest and deadliest level 20 enemies. Now for the light armor, for the level 1 you can train any die you want. We don't care about the dice, you can train Spell Warden if you want to, but as soon as you do that you can train Enchant Weapon, and then you can untrain this one and slide the remaining die like that. And generally speaking I would say it's pretty tricky to use Enchant Weapon because you need to be in magic battle form, which means you need to have some stamina in order to actually roll this die and place this in your active slot, but to actually use this die you need to be in other battle forms other than Magicka. And so sometimes it's pretty hard to fit this die in certain builds, but I think Pilgrim might be the best, or at least one of the best classes and builds to fit this die. It essentially gives you extra rerolls, which are pretty helpful to make sure that your Momentum lands, or that your Cleave lands, or some other dice that we're gonna see in a moment as well. For the level 3 of light armor, I personally love Annulment. I think it's just such a great utility die because you can ignore enemy skills, so this might come in handy when you need to defeat some enemies with Divert or Stalwart or some other nasty affixes, nasty skills. And it also helps you to prevent gaining status die, which sometimes you do gain by rolling this Onslaught on this particular side, so this is just a nice little extra synergy going on between these two dice. And for the level 4 we have this Concentration, it's the only option for the level 4, and unlike some other builds we don't heavily rely on this die. I think we already have quite a lot of damage, especially with Momentum and of course especially with Precision, but it still sometimes come in handy when you just need just a little bit of extra damage, maybe to go certain breakpoints of certain enemy defense, so I still quite like this die. And of course we're gonna need at least 3 Magicka to roll all those dice together, and yeah, we're obviously gonna need more stamina to roll a bunch of those two-handed dice, so we're gonna need at least 5 stamina, I think is great. And for the last slot we're gonna come back to this a bit later, but now let's have a look at the acrobatic skill line. Now for the level 1, train Fleet Phantom, and as soon as you do you can then train this Windwalker, and of course you can then untrain Fleet Phantom, because that is all we need. And obviously this Windwalker is one of the key dice for our build because it gives such a huge discount for precision, and if you have this Windwalker with number 2 in your cooldown track, that means your precision costs only 2 tenacity, so that means you can use this pretty much every turn, which is huge. And even though sometimes it's pretty tricky to roll roll this with number 2. Remember that because we have enchant weapon, so we have some extra rerolls, extra opportunities, more chances to roll this on this side. So this isn't too uncommon, I would say, to have this with number 2. Now for the level 3, we definitely need expert evasion. I just love this die, it helps a lot. This side completely prevents all damage, it's kind of like another your Argonian resistance ability, just prevents entire damage and then instantly recover this die. And on this side it's not the best one because it clutters your cooldown track with light fatigue, but it still might come very handy even when preventing just a single die or maybe 2 enemy combat dice. You can treat them as misses, which will definitely help a lot. Although I would say that sometimes gaining light fatigue isn't even that bad from this side because it kinda amplifies our momentum, so that's again a good synergy between these dice. And for the level 4, of course, we have this Defiance, maybe one of the best dice in the game because it gives you extra rerolls, extra tenacity, and it just works just absolutely beautifully for this build and this class in particular. Now for the Ledger Domain, I'm a huge fan of this level 1 skill dice. Not only they help you in lockpick checks, but also it's kind of another free source of tenacity because you can roll this whenever you want, whenever you do a lockpick check, even if you're not intending to get the item, even if you don't care about the lockpick itself. As soon as you land it on the cash chip, you can roll this die. Potentially you have 3 or even 4 sometimes attempt to roll extra tenacity. So this especially works great with Defiance. So yeah, sometimes if you get lucky, you can gain just a bunch of extra free tenacity essentially from this die. So I think it's great. Then of course you would need to train a level 2 skill die, then a level 3 skill die, then I'm training level 2 to slide this one like that to have a room for a level 4 skill die like that. And from my experience, by the time you train this die, it's already quite late in the campaign, which sometimes you don't even need to visit towns, you don't need those extra town actions, so it's kind of like essentially another dead die that you're not even using, just like this balanced blade. But again, this is here purely to buff up our precision so it can deal 10 true damage. And for the cooldown track, of course you absolutely need at least 4, I would say is the minimum, although keep in mind that this class and this build is pretty experience hungry, because that is already 39 experience, which is quite a lot. But if you manage to have even more experience, maybe you were very lucky with delves or some other juicy experience-wise encounters, then you can potentially train maybe even up to 5 cooldown. That will be the dream. And for this last slot, I think you can safely choose between stamina and health, but personally I prefer having health. Not only it's cheaper experience-wise, but it also just a little bit safer, and it also buffs up our cleave a little bit as well. And so that is the build. I know it might look a little bit confusing, a strange one looking build, but bear with me because you're gonna see this in action soon. Now let's talk about some items that work well with this build, and the first one, I think is probably the best one, is House Hex's Curious. After an enemy engages, you gain 1 tenacity. Seeing this item in the store is pretty much a jackpot for our class, because not only it means that you can use your precision pretty much every turn, but it also means that you have even enough tenacity to use your Wayfarer or maybe sometimes Diplomat. So yeah, just more class abilities, more tenacity, more awesomeness. Next, I would say any items that can help you to mitigate damage also work great, like this Worm called Sabatons or Silver Dawn Jack, because as I already mentioned, Pilgrim is a pretty squishy class who don't have much ways of actually preventing damage or mitigating damage, so anything that can help with that is a big win. Although frankly, choosing between these two chests, I would always 100% prefer this House Hex's Curious. I think tenacity is worth a lot for Pilgrim. Next, of course, Silver Circlet. It's hard not to recommend this item whenever you see Windwalker in your build. And also we have Enchant Weapon and Onslaught. Yeah, just plenty of level 2 dice with the ability of choosing the side that we want is just a huge boost. Next, believe it or not, I would recommend this little stick. It's a Rudimenter branch. It says the next time you would advance health, stamina or magicka, discard this item, and the chosen stat costs 1 fewer experience to advance. And as already mentioned, Pilgrim is quite experience hungry as well. You would need quite a lot of experience in order to gain all 5 level 4 skill dice to get the most value out of your precision, so you're gonna need a lot of experience, and even have just a slight discount of 1 experience can still help a lot as well. Next, we have Barkskin Helmet, and this is another item that is hard not to recommend for pretty much any melee character in particular, because after enemy engages you, you can recover leftmost die in your cooldown track. And just because we have so many dice that we want to level up and so many different skill lines already, sometimes it's just a little bit hard to upgrade your cooldown track value as well to keep it up with the pace of your skill lines. And so I find this item particularly helpful early in the game when you still have just cooldown 2, maybe you upgrade it to 3, but you're not having enough experience to upgrade it to a 4, and this definitely helps a lot. Now as for for any melee character, these Morag Tongue Bracers are pretty nice as well. After an adjacent enemy engages, you deal 1 damage to that enemy, and this damage ignores 2 defense. And because we are mostly melee character, it means that we're gonna have adjacent enemies that are engaging us, and so just dealing 2 damage back to them, or rather 1 damage that ignores 2 defense, is still pretty nice. And finally we have this weapon, Scamp Crusher, which says ignore 1 defense on your target for each combat skill dice rolled disengage. And of course, even though we have just a single combat die, remember that because of concentration we can roll potentially a bunch of other enemy combat dice, which still count as combat skill dice for this ability. It's not something we actually need, I would rather say it's more like in a nice to have category, but hey, why not? Alright, and finally let's see how this class and build feels and plays in action. For this purpose I created this demo Clash Battle, and I've slightly reduced my advancement in order to reduce the experience down to a more realistic level, which is currently 39, so as you can see I've untrained myself, and because I'm playing solo it means my enemy pool is also equals 39, as you can probably know. That is the most challenging number. Generally speaking, it is much more challenging even than 40, just purely because of the number of the enemies. And so we have a level 20 Dremora, one of the most actually threatening enemy in the entire game, arcane and daze and range and 3 combat. That is just a lot, and also 9 health, and because it deals true damage because of arcane, even my Argonian resistant racial ability not gonna help against that damage. So this is really strong. Now for level 10 we have Scamps. I would say not the most maybe threatening skills, but 3 range and 3 enemy combat dice and 7 health and 2 defense. Just all those stats alone makes it quite threatening nevertheless. For level 5 we have Orc Marauder. Now I would say one of the most dangerous level 5 enemies because of the combination of aggressive and 2 enemy combat dice, so that is potentially 4 damage from this enemy, and also steel and 2 defense, so it's a quite tanky unit as well. And for level 1s we have Redguard Bandit, Imperial Bandit, High Health Bandit, as always plenty of bandits, and Spriggan. And as always I'm having a complete fresh start, which means I don't have any tenacity, which is just very bad for our Pilgrim. And even though of course our passive ability, our innate ability, we could potentially gain some 2 tenacity because of that, if we can imagine that we would train any known combat skill die, but just to make it more harder, more challenging, I'm starting with no tenacity whatsoever. I also don't have any items, and also all of my skill dice are available, which is quite a bad thing actually, because normally all the skill dice from the light armor skill line, they can persist between battles in your active slots, so normally, and I would say generally speaking, you would quite often start a battle with all those buffs already in place, and ideally you would also want your acrobatics already sitting somewhere here in the second half of your cooldown track, but because I'm starting completely fresh, it means I'm gonna need to take a lot of engages in order to make all those buffs before I could start actually dealing some damage. Alright, so it's a combat round 1, adventurous turn, and well, let's see how we can handle this fight. And well, given that I have only 5 health and this Dremora is dealing true damage, I definitely need to get rid of this enemy before I take any damage from this unit, but it looks like that for that I need to have enough tenacity to fire off with my precision ability. And because of all those enemies that are standing on my way, I don't have enough movement to walk around, and even though those couple of hexes would be some nice slots, nice hexes for dealing some area damage with cleave, there's just no way I could get there, so it looks like I need to go my way through and start dealing some damage with this frontline enemy first. So as my first engage I'm gonna roll all light armor skill dice just to have my buffs up, and this is why I'm starting also in magic battle form. And I think I also gonna roll this defiance, because this is really the key die for rerolling and just gaining extra tenacity, which will definitely come in handy. And remember that because all the skill lines from the Thief constellation, they don't require any battle form, this is why I can roll those dice together, and of course the normal limit of the associated stat is still applies, which means I can potentially roll up to 3 dice in this magic battle form that are associated with magicka, like my light armor, and I could potentially roll up to 5 dice that are associated with stamina. So even though I could roll probably more of those dice like expert evasion and windwalker, I would probably still leave them for some later engages, just to be mindful of my cooldown track. Alright, so first engage, I'm rolling these 3 dice alongside defiance, and I don't need to declare any target because that's kinda only my buffs. And okay, let's see what we get. And yes, we've got our Defiance landed on this side, which is great. We've got a miss on Enchant Weapon, and we've got annulment with number 4, which isn't the best result, but still pretty decent. But we've got Concentration with 3, which is pretty good. So first I'm resolving my Defiance, putting this in a cooldown track, and as soon as it's here I can already reroll this die and even gain 1 tenacity because of that. So I have 1 attempt on rerolling this die. Let's see what we get. And we've got number 3, which is pretty lucky here, I guess, but I'll take it. So these are dice, I'm putting them in my active slots. just like that, and that was my first engage. Now for my second engage, I think I'm gonna need to start dealing some damage to this front line of enemies, and the way they stand in means that with my cleave I can deal only damage to 2 units, so not all 3 of them, unfortunately. Although to be fair, I think my cleave isn't as strong on this particular character because we have only 5 health and 5 stamina, so that means that adjacent enemies will take a maximum of 3 damage. So yeah, you know what, I'll just make one step here, closer towards this red guard bandit, because I don't like steel and I would like to probably focus in on this enemy first, and you're gonna see why in a moment. So I'm taking another engage, adding 2 light fatigue to my cooldown track, and that is so because I'm playing on the expert difficulty. As part of this engage, I'm also changing battle form to heavy weapon. Now I'm gonna roll cleave alongside expert evasion. I think these are the only 2 dice that I need, and I'm targeting red guard bandit, but because it has 1 shield and 5 health, that means no matter what side this cleave land, that won't be enough damage, because that's 5 damage on either side and I need at least 6 damage. So I think I'm gonna reduce this concentration by 1 down to 2 to add 2 enemy combat dice to this engage. That should do it. That should be enough to defeat this enemy. Alright, and so this is what I'm rolling, and let's see what we get. And we've got a pretty bad result. We've got miss on the cleave and we've got expert evasion. On this, definitely not the best side, and also 1 miss on the enemy combat die, but thanks to Defiance we still have a chance to reroll in this for something better. So first I'm gaining 1 tenacity and I have 1 attempt to reroll this. Let's see what we get. And this time it's definitely better, so I'm dealing 6 damage because of this enemy combat die, which is enough now to defeat this red guard bandit. So 1 enemy down, and I'm also dealing 1 damage to the adjacent enemy. Well, I'm dealing 3 damage, but because it has 2 defense, only 1 goes through, so this orc marauder takes 1 damage. And I'm returning this dice to the supply and resolving this one in a cooldown track like that. And because my cooldown value is 4, this is why I wanted to roll only a single die in my cooldown track on the first engage, because this way I will recover my cleave on the next turn. Now I'm gonna take another engage, so I'm adding 2 more light fatigue to my cooldown track, and I think this time I'm gonna roll momentum alongside Windwalker, and I'll be targeting Orc Marauder. And because I have 4 light fatigue in my cooldown track, that means my momentum can potentially deal 8 damage, of course if it lands. And knowing that this die can deal 8 damage, it means that I can safely roll just this single die, so I don't need to add Onslaught or Wrecking Blow or any other die, and because I have Defiance and Enchant Weapon, I have a pretty good feeling that this can land. So these are the 2 dice that I'm rolling, targeting Orc Marauder, and let's see what we get. And wow, look at that, we have momentum landed on the hit, and we also got Windwalker on the best side, and this is definitely not the average result. So you know what, let me reroll this, because I think this one is just too lucky. So I'm rolling this again, let's see what we get. And well, I guess I am a bit lucky today because I still got this Windwalker with number 2, but we've got a miss on the momentum. But again, because we have Defiance, I can reroll it for free and still gain tenacity. So I'm now at 3 tenacity and I can reroll this for free. Let's see what we get. And we've got another miss, which this time is pretty bad, but thankfully we have Enchant Weapon, so I'm gonna reduce this down to 2, so I'm reducing this by 1 to reroll it again. So let's see what we get. And this time it's landed, so that means I'm gonna deal 8 damage, which is totally enough to defeat this Orc Marauder. So another enemy down, and I'm gonna place this dice in a cooldown track in that order. And if you look at my cooldown track, it looks like on the next turn I can recover my cleave, and on the turn after that, in the beginning of combat round 3, I will recover this die as well, momentum, while my Windwalker gonna steal in the cooldown track, which is exactly what I want. And now finally, because I have 3 tenacity and I have Windwalker, that means I have already enough tenacity to activate my precision to defeat Dream Aura. And remember, because this class ability doesn't require any particular battle form, it means I can use this in any battle form, and obviously I cannot reach this enemy in this heavy weapon battle form because it can target only adjacent enemies, but I can add 1 light fatigue to switch my battle form to either ranged or magica. In this case it doesn't matter. Well, let me switch this to magic battle form, let's say, because in magic battle form my range is equal to my magic stat, which is 3, so that means now Dream Aura is a targetable enemy for me, so I'm spending 2 tenacity. That is because I have Windwalker, so I have a nice discount to deal 10 true damage to this enemy, which is totally enough. Pew! 10 damage. Dream Aura is down. And I think I'm gonna leave my turn like that. I cannot move anyway, so even though potentially I could have made another engage, maybe in ranged battle form, to arrange this single combat die alongside 4 enemy combat dice because of concentration. So I guess I could try my luck in finishing off some of those enemies, but I just don't want to do that. I don't want to clutter my cooldown, and I would rather save the concentration for the next turns. Now it's enemy's turn, starting with the level 10 scamps. They have a range of 3, which means they need to make 1 movement closer to me. So now we have a range 3, 1, 2, 3, and they roll in 3 enemy combat dice, targeting me. Let's see what they deal. And that is 4 damage, which I definitely don't want to take, so I'm using my Argonian Resistant, my racial ability, to prevent all of that damage. However, this enemy skill Maim still applies. Even though I'm not taking any damage, I'm still taking Maim, which is a little bit shame, even though I have just a single combat die. Plan to roll some other combat dice because of my concentration, and now with Maim the damage will be half down. So this is a little bit nasty, and of course I could have even prevent this status die entirely using my annulment, but I think I would rather save this to prevent Bane, because Bane is definitely quite scarier, especially given my busy cooldown track. So, and I guess that's it. Now Spriggan turn, they move 1 hex closer to me, so now we are within range 2. They don't roll any combat dice, they only apply Bane, but because of my annulment I can reduce this die by 2 to prevent gaining any status die. So I'm reducing this from 4 down to 2, and I'm not gaining any Bane. This Imperial Bandit also takes 1 step closer to me and rolls 1 enemy combat die, so let's see what they get. And well, we had miss, that is pretty lucky, so you know what, let me roll this just in case. Yep, 1 damage. I think this is more statistically average damage you can expect from a single enemy combat die, so this isn't that lucky. But because I have expert evasion, I can add 1 light fatigue to treat this damage, this die, as miss. So now I'm taking no damage, because I would rather keep my health at full, so my cleave can deal all 5 damage. And finally we have this High Elf Bandit, which has a range of 4, and I think it can reach me right from here, so that is 1, 2, 3, 4. Yep, I'm within range, so this enemy is attacking with a single combat die as well. And we've got 2 damage, so I'm definitely taking another light fatigue with my expert evasion to treat this die as miss. So I took no damage this turn. Alright, that was the end of the enemy's activation. Now it's the beginning of combat round 2, adventure turn, and I'm gonna recover 4 dice. So I'm recovering Defiance, I'm moving 2 light fatigue to the supply, and I'm recovering Cleave as well, and sliding the remaining dice like that. Alright, I think as my first action I'm gonna move somewhere here, closer to this gentleman, and given that I have 5 health and 5 stamina, means my cleave deals exactly 5 damage no matter on which side it lands. I think I have a good chance of just defeating this Spriggan with a single attack. So I'm gonna roll just these 2 dice again, Cleave and Defiance, and I'm switching my battle form to Heavy Weapon. These are just 2 dice that I'm rolling, targeting Spriggan, and let's see what we get. And we've missed on Cleave, but at least this one is landed, so as always I'm resolving Defiance first, placing this in my cooldown track, which means now I can reroll this for free, even gaining Tenacity, so I'm gaining 1 Tenacity, I'm now at 2, and I have 1 free reroll, and let's see what we get. And now we've got a hit, so that means this Spriggan takes 5 damage, which is exactly enough to defeat this enemy in 1 go. And I'm also dealing 3 damage to adjacent enemies, which means this Imperial Bandit take 2 damage because of 1 defense, and also this Scamps takes 1 damage as well. And that was the end of my first engage this round. And now because I have 2 tenacity and I still have this Windwalker with number 2, that means I can use my precision ability again. And so this is definitely what I'm gonna do now, dealing just 10 true damage to Scamps and pew. Goodbye Scamps, another enemy down. And I think that's it. I don't think I can make another engage. I guess I could, but I just don't want to burn some dice and gaining over fatigue and all this jazz. So I would rather leave some empty slots here in my cooldown tracks so I could prevent some damage with my expert evasion. And of course my tenacity is went from 2 down to 0. Alright, so it's now enemy's activation turn, starting with the Imperial Bandit. They roll a single enemy combat die. And we'll get 1, but you know what, as I said, I don't want to take any damage, so I'm just gaining light fatigue to prevent this from happening, just treating this essentially as a miss. And now for the High Elf Bandit, they roll the same combat die as well, also dealing 1 damage, but I'm gonna treat this as miss as well, so I'm taking no damage, but for the cost of gaining light fatigue. So that was the end of enemy's attack turn. Now it's the beginning of combat round 3, adventurous turn. I'm recovering these 4 dice, so moving 2 light fatigue to the supplied, recovering my momentum and expert evasion, sliding the remaining dice like that. And it looks like I have 4 slots left in my cooldown track, which means that is exactly enough to roll 1 die, then take another engage, gaining 2 more light fatigue, and then rolling another die. And so that is exactly my plan. I'm just gonna roll a single momentum die, because I have plenty of light fatigue. This will deal more damage than it needs to, so definitely would be enough to defeat this Imperial Bandit. Single die that I'm rolling, targeting Imperial Bandit. Let's see what we get. And it landed on a hit right away, although to be honest I would rather prefer it to land on a miss, so that I could reroll it with my Defiance while still gaining tenacity. So in this particular case I would rather see a miss than a hit, but hey, can't complain anyway. This enemy is down, and that is of course all I need. So this die is now resolved. Now as my second action I need to come closer to High Elf Bandit to finish it off with my melee attacks, and I think I can go through the cash chip. So I can make 1-2 steps, kind of going through this chip, and by doing that I can roll this die from my Ledger Domain skill line. Obviously I don't want to make any lockpick checks now, but I still want to roll this die just to see if I can get any tenacity. So 3 attempts, no, and no, and well, no misses unfortunately. I would definitely prefer to see some tenacity, at least generally speaking that's what I'm trying to do, especially when I have my Defiance in my cooldown track, so this little die just sometimes can be like a little extra way of gaining free tenacity essentially. Although of course in this case I didn't get any, but hey, whatever I guess. And this of course cash chip is removed. Of course I don't care about this at the moment. So now I'm gonna take another engage, so I'm adding 2 light fatigue, and it looks like that this single onslaught die should finish off the enemy regardless of this side, because this side deals 4 damage, this one deals 5 damage, and the enemy has only 3 health and no defense, so that should definitely finish it off. Let's see what we get. And we've got a miss, which I cannot complain because I have Defiance, so I'm gaining tenacity and rolling this again. And this is exactly what I wanted, dealing 5 damage, one-shotting this enemy, and of course this die is again drained, but I don't care about it because it's the end of battle anyway, so at the end of battle and during the battle cleanup, which is happening at the moment, this die would get recovered anyway. And of course this die could potentially land on this side instead, which means I would need to exhaust this and also gain Bane, which would be quite messy, but remember that I have my enchant weapon, so I had 2 more attempts to reroll this as needed, and this is why I like it. It just gives me a little bit more reliability and consistency. And so that's it, that was the end of battle. As you can see, this precision is just absolutely ridiculous, probably the strongest ability in the game. Dealing 10 true damage is just a lot. It is enough to defeat in one go even such as threatening enemies like Dremora or pretty much any enemy presently in the game. Of course, provided that you have that many level 4 skill dice trained, but this is why exactly I have all 5 of them, even though these 2 are pretty much kinda dead dice in my build. I guess this one can come in handy in towns, but at the moment, or rather at this stage while you train this die, I would say you're pretty rarely going to towns anyway, and this balance blade, yeah, there's just no way using this in this build, but it's still buffing up your precision, and that's exactly the point. Argonian Resistant definitely helped me in this fight, and this is why I said I generally prefer to have some kind of defensive options, defensive racial ability with this class, and I think this is why Argonian works so well. And I think Defiance is definitely the king of this build. It allows to gain so much tenacity and extra rerolls, which definitely helps a lot here. So overall, very strong class with a huge burst potential, although sometimes it's kind of tricky to build it up and advance it to the way exactly you want it, but it is definitely worth it. And that's a wrap for today's video. This class, guys, take quite a bit of time and effort to put together, so if you found this video helpful, please give it a like and subscribe for more board gaming content. And if you would like to support the channel directly, you can also do this over on Patreon, and it really means a lot to me. And well, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.